The story begins with a girl named Eleanor. During a ball, she heard people's thoughts, mainly surrounding her body. People couldn't stop thinking about her hourglass figure, men wanting to spend the night with her, and how there were rumors that even the prince of a neighboring country had been seduced by her. The voices commented that it was no wonder she was known as the bewitching princess. Eleanor Lanchester was the villainess in a game, and she could hear everyone's thoughts. She had such beauty that it was said even a glance from her could pierce one's heart. There was no doubt she was stunning, even more beautiful than the game's heroine. The heroine conquers the heroes who have had their hearts stolen by Eleanor. It was a unique game, sometimes called a plundering game. It turns out that Eleanor was once an ordinary player who got reincarnated into the character, and it was quite a lot to get used to. As she walked through the crowd, all she could hear were people's thoughts about her body and how they wanted to be with her. Eleanor had a hidden characteristic. She could hear people's inner voices. The first voice she had ever heard belonged to her mother, who had petted Eleanor's head as a child but deep down thought there was no point in having a girl. Her mother suffered because she couldn't have a son, and had some resentment toward Eleanor because of it. In these 16 years, she learned that humans are creatures with different beliefs and inner thoughts, and that was why Eleanor played with the hearts of men. Because of her looks, there were many men who openly showed interest in her. As we learned, her parents didn't love her, and she didn't have anybody who saw her for who she was. Maybe this broke Eleanor's heart. At the ball, Eleanor walked up to her parents, whose thoughts were just as disappointing as the rest of the crowd. Her mother was embarrassed to be her mother, and her father was thinking about how Eleanor could use her body to seduce the prince. All Eleanor knew was that she was truly unloved. The lies people tell each day and the emotions that are hidden beneath them made Eleanor grow colder by the day. She didn't plan on acting like Eleanor in the game, but she still didn't believe she could fall in love. In fact, she was planning to spend the rest of her life alone, but to her surprise, she was to be picked as the prince's fiancée. This left a big question mark for Eleanor, who had no idea what would become of her. She had reincarnated while playing the online game, so she didn't know how all of this would end. The king arrived and the crowd stopped what they were doing to bow before him. The king smiled, announcing that his son would find his future fiancée among the beautiful girls at the ball. He told everyone to enjoy themselves tonight. Eleanor could hear the king predicting that she would be the top candidate. The king even envied his son, thinking Eleanor was beautiful. Eleanor sighed, wishing sometimes she didn't have the power to hear everyone's thoughts. She also heard her own father thinking she would be the top candidate. If the first prince liked her, the betrothal would be finalized. Eleanor wondered if she would really be able to do this. She looked down to see a stranger in front of her. He was very cute. Was that who she thought it was? The man announced that he was grateful for everyone who had gathered today before turning his attention to Eleanor. Did that sparkling prince just let out a boyish voice? Or did Eleanor imagine it? Her mother chuckled regardless, already impressed by the prince. Her mother gave Eleanor a hint that the prince would invite her for the first dance. Her father also told her to get ready, but Eleanor could hear her mother wishing she were younger so she could seduce the prince herself. Her father was only excited, knowing the prince would like Eleanor's body. Eleanor forced a smile, knowing she needed to pull herself together. Then she heard her name being called. The prince was right in front of her. He asked if it was all right for him to have the first dance. She heard him thinking childishly if he had said that properly, and she knew he was nervous. Eleanor tried to hold back her laughter, saying yes as composedly as she could. The prince took her hand and he began to get nervous again. He thought she was very cute and her hand was so thin. He even thought it would be good if she put on some weight. As they stepped onto the dance floor, the prince told Eleanor he was looking forward to this dance. Eleanor agreed as he placed his hand on her waist. He thought to himself how thin it was. Eleanor swayed with the prince, impressed by his perfect dance moves, and when he smiled, he truly was flawless. She looked into his eyes, surprised by how silly his thoughts were. Despite the prince being both handsome and accomplished, he fretted and stressed like a schoolboy. He thought Eleanor was an amazing dancer and worried he was doing the right thing. Eleanor smiled. There was no doubt he was adorable. She couldn't hold back how cute he was, which was surprising because Eleanor was hardly ever attracted to men. It was almost enjoyable having her skill this time, as the prince wondered how he could get closer to Eleanor. To be thinking all of this while dancing was interesting, but to Eleanor everything felt comfortable. It was the first time she had met someone who made her feel this way. Eventually, the prince bowed, and Eleanor heard the thoughts of the crowd. The women were jealous of her, and the men were convinced the prince would propose to her. But it wasn't long until the prince was swarmed by other ladies, also requesting a dance. Eleanor had to step aside, her head still spinning over what had just happened. The prince, named Prince Asher, rushed back over to her. He asked if it was all right to take her on a stroll in the courtyard. Of course, Eleanor agreed. In the courtyard, the atmosphere was perfect. It was dark and quiet, and Asher was just like a prince from a fairy tale. He looked up at the stars and thought about how beautiful the moon looked. Eleanor smiled, sensing the prince really was like a young boy. Asher thought how the night made him want to hum, so without a second thought, he did. Eleanor closed her eyes listening to him. It was quite cute how he began to hum a song, but who would imagine that the prince thought about things like this? The prince continued to think about how fun today had been since he got to spend time with Eleanor. He looked into her eyes, which caught Eleanor off guard. He asked if she was cold. Eleanor heard him worry about her, even ready to fetch a shawl for her from the gazebo. Eleanor quickly reassured him that she was fine, but the prince was worried since her cheeks were red. Eleanor knew she needed to get it together. It wasn't like she could say she was embarrassed because of his inner thoughts. She reassured Asher that she was just a bit nervous, but there was no need to worry. Asher admitted he was a bit nervous too, and thought how cute it was that Eleanor was a little on edge. They sat down in the gazebo, and the prince commented on how lovely the night was. Eleanor agreed, as the prince thought about how he needed to start a conversation. He needed to do his best so Eleanor would also enjoy herself. So Eleanor spoke first, telling Asher how beautiful the moon was tonight. She turned to him, saying it was an honor to go on a walk with him like this. Asher looked into her eyes and responded that he was happy to hear that. He told Eleanor the honor was all his. He thought to himself that the rumors about Eleanor were wrong. She was kind, and she smiled a lot. He knew she was smiling brightly during their walk, and he was glad she was happy. Eleanor realized that she was acting quite off script, and she thought she needed to be more careful in the future. She remembered how people had told her she had a nice smile, only to think otherwise. But Asher let her know he was glad to have spent time with her today. Eleanor's eyes widened as she suddenly realized she couldn't hear his inner voice. Instead, what she could hear was the sound of her leaping heart. Eleanor heard Asher call her name. She turned around to see him smiling eagerly. He was blown away by how good she looked. They decided to head off together. It had been a month since Eleanor met Prince Asher at the ball, and they had officially become engaged. Later that day, Eleanor slept on the couch, exhausted. There weren't any other ladies of similar rank, so the engagement was decided fairly easily. Of course, it was no easy event, and Eleanor was exhausted afterward. She remembered walking through the hall with Asher by her side, and people thought that the modest engagement dress Eleanor was wearing made her stand out even more. They thought she was most definitely a wicked woman for leading men's hearts astray. Of course, Eleanor was used to the criticism, but it certainly still took a toll on her. Eleanor heard her name being called and learned that Asher wanted to see her. Eleanor bounced up to see Asher's bright smile. He apologized for bothering her while she was tired, but Eleanor didn't mind. She asked if something was the matter. Asher took Eleanor's hands and told her she looked beautiful. He said that today marked the start of a new adventure they were taking together, and he was honored to walk it with her. Deep down, Asher was fanboying over his future wife. He couldn't believe how pretty she was and predicted she would look even prettier in her wedding dress. Eleanor thanked him as she looked into his eyes. Prince Asher was certainly different, and though she still didn't understand love, if it was with Prince Asher, then she was sure they would be able to paint a bright future together. She told Asher with a bright smile that she would be in his care from now on. But this ability to hear people's inner voices was causing her some trouble. She wondered if she would need to keep that hidden from now on as well. She wondered if she should tell Asher or just keep it a secret. Asher saw Eleanor's hesitance and asked her if something was wrong. Eleanor forced a smile, telling him no. Eleanor's carriage arrived at the royal palace, and she instructed her driver to stop. She was a little bit late, but was met with a mysterious figure at the gates. The man told Eleanor it was an honor to meet her. Eleanor could tell he liked what he saw. She politely thanked him but explained she was on her way to see the prince. As soon as she escaped her admirer, she was unfortunately met with two more. They asked her if she would like to have a cup of tea with them, another commenting on how he envied the prince for being able to spend time with her. Eleanor had no idea why everyone was approaching her today. She was already in a hurry. One of the men even held out his hand to offer to escort her. Eleanor tried to quickly think of an excuse, but fortunately Asher appeared, waving to his fiancée. Eleanor apologized for making him wait, but Asher was concerned something had happened. Eleanor turned to see that the men had darted away, blurting out apologies for stopping her. Asher worked out exactly what had happened. He knew Eleanor was usually late, but was she always getting stopped by others? He asked Eleanor if this type of thing happened often, and Eleanor began to panic. She didn't want to be misunderstood by Prince Asher, so she told him it seemed like the men were just worried about her. Asher laughed, telling her that starting next time he would go to the carriage to pick her up. He thought to himself that he wasn't paying enough attention and needed to check who else tried to speak to her. He didn't want her feeling uncomfortable. Up until now, Eleanor would hear men out when they confessed to her, as she struggled to turn them away. Then rumors would spread that she was flirting with men or that she was a lecherous woman. She was relieved Asher didn't immediately jump to conclusions and prioritized her feelings. Asher thought about how he should think of a countermeasure, and Eleanor could only imagine what that entailed. A notice hung in the hallways Eleanor usually walked down, saying boys were banned. Of course, the men of the palace were extremely disappointed that they could no longer see Eleanor. The next day, Eleanor greeted Asher, who complimented her looks as usual. Eleanor thanked him, taking hold of his arm. He led her into the ballroom, the place Eleanor was dreading the most. What got to her was the way people looked at her, but now she was going out in order to establish her place as the first prince's betrothed. If she continued to isolate herself and not interact with others, then she might not be able to protect the things she wanted to protect. Eleanor was scared, but she wanted to become a source of strength for Asher. That was what she thought. But that evening she became more tired than she expected. She was having fun dancing with Prince Asher, but he was taken away by a group of boys. Asher excused himself and Eleanor smiled, telling him she would head over to the lounge. Asher told her he would come and find her in a bit. Eleanor made her way to the lounge only to be met with judgmental stares from the women inside. When she took a seat, she was told that all the other women were leaving. Eleanor told them she would stay in the lounge by herself for a bit. She heard the women thinking that Eleanor was stuck up and lewd too. She had to take a breath to calm down. It was frustrating for Eleanor that she had tried her best tonight but was still being harshly judged by the attendees. She heard her name and someone asking where she was. Eleanor looked up, surprised to hear that the voice belonged to Lord Edgar, a man who had been stubbornly trying to talk to her, though proper manners dictated that a man shouldn't enter the women's drawing room. She kept hearing his voice asking where she was, and to make matters worse, she heard his vile and desperate thoughts. Eleanor stood up, dashing to hide behind the curtain. To her horror, the door opened and she heard his footsteps approach her. Eleanor began to tear up. She was completely frozen. If she went into the dance hall, she would have to face the rude way the attendees looked at her. Of course, that was why she was alone in the room, but she wanted to do her best and try things she was not used to. The result of that was that she ended up alone once again. Eleanor began to sob, fearing she hadn't changed at all. Suddenly, Edgar opened the curtain, smiling creepily, having found Eleanor. Eleanor ran as fast as she could, but Edgar caught her, pushing her to the ground. She began to cry, fearing the worst. Edgar announced that he was going to give her his love. Eleanor's mind flashed to what had just happened. Moments ago, she was on her way to the waiting room, where she bumped into the creepy and persistent Lord Edgar. He asked her what she was doing and if she was truly alone, then requested to take her to the terrace. Eleanor knew she always made sure to run away so that he couldn't trap her in a corner, but she had decided to change. So she assertively told Edgar she was on her way to the waiting room and would be there with her fiancé, Prince Asher. She walked away, leaving Edgar rejected. He turned to two guards and asked if they were looking after Eleanor. He had a favor to ask and used his title as a duke to make them obey. That was how he got into the room in the first place. Eleanor begged him to stop, but Edgar suggested she stay quiet to avoid being discovered. Eleanor knew he was right. If Asher saw her like this, he might assume she had seduced him, but deep down she knew he wasn't the type to think that. Eleanor was never loved by the people she wanted to love her, but she wanted to be a good girl, so she lived her life making sure not to break. She worked hard, she endured, but at some point giving up had become normal to her. She had no intention of acting like a tragic heroine, and then she finally met Asher. But if he were to reject her, she didn't think her heart could handle it anymore. In that case, what should she do? Suddenly, she saw Edgar's face get smacked by none other than Asher. Eleanor's eyes came alive again. What had just happened? As soon as Edgar was knocked unconscious, Asher rushed to Eleanor, picking her up. He apologized to her, telling her they should leave. Eleanor knew she needed to pull herself together. Once they were out of the room, Asher ordered his guards to escort Duke Dudley out. As the guards handled Edgar, Eleanor could hear them thinking about how they were glad they had reported him to Asher, and now she was in Asher's arms, who was comforting her. But Eleanor soon realized that she couldn't hear his inner voice anymore. It was like he was making sure not to let his anger show. A man approached him, letting him know that they had secured the room. The man was Harry, Prince Asher's aide, and Eleanor also knew him as the second son of the Connor Marquisate. Harry was thinking nothing other than Vavavoom. It was familiar, and Eleanor soon worked out it belonged to Harry, who suggested Asher move before it turned into a commotion. So the three took a seat as Harry explained that he had collected information about Duke Dudley and reported his stalking. Eleanor looked at Harry in confusion. He appeared to be a completely normal guy on the outside, but his inner voice. Prince Asher had changed too, and Eleanor realized she still couldn't hear his thoughts. She could only wonder what he was thinking. Asher suddenly called Eleanor's name, making her jump, and it was then that she heard his thoughts for the first time in a while. He was thinking, how could he be the one feeling down when it must be even worse for Lady Eleanor? He knew it was bad. Eleanor's eyes widened, but she waited patiently for what he was about to say. He opened his mouth only to tell her it was safe here, and that he had contacted her parents. He told her to spend the night in one of the guest rooms. Eleanor told the prince she didn't want to trouble him, but Asher explained he wanted to make sure she was safe. He was worried about her. Eleanor could also hear him thinking about whether she would depend on him at a time like this. He worried he didn't come across as dependable yet, and that was something he needed to work on. Eleanor tightened her fists. The last thing she wanted was for the prince to think he was undependable. She asked Asher if he thought she had seduced Lord Edgar. Asher looked at her, and Eleanor desperately wanted to hear what he was thinking. She expected him to think poorly of her, but to her surprise, Asher rose from his seat and sat next to her, putting his hand on hers. He told her he did not think anything of the sort, and Eleanor could hear him thinking if these kinds of things had been said to her before. He understood she had been approached many times by men, which may have made things difficult, but Asher reassured her that he could only see Eleanor as a lovely woman, and he noticed that she had made an effort to be more outgoing and social. She wasn't a seductress at all. Of course, Asher worried about how he could word that, and Eleanor admitted she was feeling very embarrassed. It was the first time someone had spoken so innocently to her, and she thought that she hadn't changed at all. But that wasn't true. It might have only been one small step, but Prince Asher noticed it. It was then that Asher realized Eleanor's face was bright red. Thinking that he was the only one who had seen her make this expression made him feel great. Eleanor awkwardly murmured, and Asher flashed her a reassuring smile. He called her cute and decided that he needed to work extra hard so he could protect her. Harry watched the encounter and awkwardly excused himself. Eleanor could hear nothing other than "va-va-voom" as he left. What a strange person Harry was. Fortunately, the day came to an end, and Eleanor returned to her peaceful everyday life, or so she thought. As her maid settled her hair, she was asked if it was true that she would be seeing Prince Asher in the afternoon. Eleanor looked up to see her hair tied in a ponytail. Her maids admitted they wanted to give her a different vibe than usual, telling her that any kind of makeup looked good on her. Eleanor could hear her maids' thoughts, who only adored her. They knew about the rumors but didn't believe a bit of them. Eleanor smiled, asking the maids if she did look nice. Her maids smiled in excitement, telling her that the prince would fall in love with her all over again. Eleanor thanked her maids, and she realized that the palace was filled with lovely people, although she wasn't quite used to it yet. Eleanor looked out the window to see the most beautiful garden. She decided to take a walk outside, a perfect opportunity for her to clear her mind. It was then that she heard some thoughts. Someone had spotted her and wondered if she was the first prince's fiancée. It was the first time Eleanor had heard this voice, as it continued to think that it would be good if Eleanor were used for the country. The voice debated whether they should speak to her. Was it an envoy from another country? The voice thought about the extremists of the second prince and how they were planning the assassination of Asher. Eleanor's eyes widened. Assassination? She knew she needed to find out where the voice was coming from. Eleanor began to rush toward the voice, knowing she needed to gather more information. She passed a bush and was met with a man who smiled and greeted her. The suspect was Siegfried. The man's full name was Siegfried Lisa Azabia, and he was the fourth prince of another kingdom. It was said that he handled all of his kingdom Azabia's foreign diplomacy. He was one of the men whose heart had been stolen by Eleanor in the game. They had even put a good amount of effort into his drawing on the game's title screen. Eleanor also remembered her tutor discussing their neighboring country, Azabia. She had told Eleanor that in order to build friendly relations with them, the fourth prince of Azabia, Lord Siegfried, would be visiting their country. Eleanor thought to herself that it was interesting she had learned about this neighboring nation. But running into one of the heroine's capture targets like this was something else entirely. She heard her guards think to themselves how frustrating it was having a foreign prince in Eleanor's presence. They were already stressed from the commotion last night and couldn't be bothered with another problem. Eleanor knew she would also like to avoid more trouble, but the extremists supporting the second prince were plotting the assassination of the first prince, Asher. Eleanor knew that was something she could not ignore. This man was thinking that women were so easy, though he presented himself as a polite young man. He asked Eleanor if she was the fiancée of Prince Asher, knowing that he needed to come across as friendly to get Eleanor on his side. Eleanor was taken aback by how the inner thoughts of the prince conflicted with how he acted in person. It was quite unnerving, in fact. Eleanor listened as Siegfried thought about using her for the sake of his country. She realized that this person really had no genuine interest in others. She snapped out of her thoughts and introduced herself as Eleanor Lanchester. Siegfried took her hand, telling her to just call him by his first name. He went on to say that both of their countries had good relations, so he was sure they would run into each other often. Eleanor had to keep a pleasant face even after hearing Siegfried confirm his plans to kill Asher. She shook his hand one last time, trying to stop herself from trembling. But she knew that right now that was not what mattered. She needed to find out how much Lord Siegfried knew, so she turned to Siegfried with a smile, asking him if he had many foreign acquaintances. Siegfried told her that he did, mentioning that he wanted to develop stronger relationships with these people. Eleanor heard him thinking that if Prince Asher was assassinated, the country would soon fall into chaos. Eleanor listened as he continued thinking about when this would happen. confirming that it would be at the next event where the extremists could approach the prince. So Eleanor brought up how she had heard there would be a ball for foreign dignitaries. She cleverly asked Siegfried if he was planning to attend. Siegfried immediately told Eleanor that he was, but she could hear him thinking that it would be a pain since that was the day they were planning to carry out the assassination. Eleanor worked it out. She had a date, but now she needed to continue pretending to know nothing. It turned out that the game and reality were totally different. In the game, you'd invite the capture targets to dance at balls, events where you could raise favorability, but reality was much harsher. Eleanor had discovered useful information, but she still didn't know how they were going to carry out the plot. If they were going to kill Asher at the ball, how would the murder be carried out? Through a stabbing? Poisoning his drink? Eleanor needed to think about what she could do. Siegfried looked at her and asked what was on her mind. Eleanor had to think fast, telling him nothing. When Siegfried looked closer, he realized Eleanor was quite attractive. He even thought about getting closer to her, but that was when Vavavoom appeared out of nowhere. He knew Siegfried was evil. Harry told Eleanor that Asher was calling for her. Eleanor excused herself from Siegfried, who smiled slyly, telling her, "Until next time." He didn't like Harry, which wasn't surprising as he thought of him as the sly, bespectacled aide of Prince Asher. Siegfried also pieced together that Asher must truly treasure Eleanor. Eleanor began to blush, hurrying away as fast as she could. Siegfried noticed and even wondered if she was blushing because of him. He thought that women were easy. So Eleanor suddenly spoke very loudly, saying how she was really looking forward to seeing Prince Asher. That really stung Siegfried's ego. Of course, Siegfried was charming, but Eleanor only had eyes for Asher. As long as she could be by Prince Asher's side, that was enough for her. And right now, she was genuinely excited to see him. Harry escorted her to the room and told her to wait there. It was then that Eleanor noticed Asher wasn't there yet. Harry turned to Eleanor to confess that he had received a message saying she had run into Lord Siegfried, and Prince Asher had sent him in a hurry. Harry assumed it was probably because of Asher's jealous side. Eleanor still couldn't hear Harry's thoughts other than nonsense, so she simply told him she guessed so too. She then wondered if Lord Harry was the one calling her Vavavoom. It was super strange, and she couldn't predict what he was thinking. Soon after, Asher came sprinting in. He told Eleanor he was sorry for keeping her waiting. Eleanor stood up, telling Asher that he must have worked hard today. Asher asked Eleanor if she had gone for a walk that morning, but Eleanor could hear him thinking about her meeting with Siegfried. He was worried that she might have been attracted to his good looks. Eleanor was sad to hear this, but told the prince that her walk was pleasant. Asher then asked Eleanor if she had met the prince. He warned her that Siegfried was quite a lewd person and that she should be careful. Asher truly was amazing, like he could predict her troubles. She agreed that she would be careful, but all Asher could think was that it wasn't all right. He knew men were wolves. Eleanor gasped quietly and went red. Asher wondered if it was because of Siegfried, but Eleanor laughed and said she was just happy to see Asher. In fact, she was so happy her face was burning. Asher then began to swear under his breath, and the awkward encounter ended with him apologizing. Meanwhile, Harry looked at the couple blankly. Asher turned to Eleanor to tell her that he was happy to see her too, and that he didn't want her smile to be taken away. The two held hands, and Eleanor swore she would protect Prince Asher. Lady Eleanor was informed the next day that a letter from Prince Asher had arrived. She thanked her maid, who handed it to her. Compared to before, Eleanor had gotten even closer with Prince Asher. She was warmly greeted by his handwriting, telling her that he was looking forward to seeing her at the next ball. The day of the plot to kill Prince Asher came faster than Eleanor realized, and she had to think fast. She knew that what she could do was gather information, even if it meant piecing small bits together. She weaved through the crowd, trying not to listen in too much to unnecessary thoughts, until one thought caught her attention. It asked why Asher was the first prince. Eleanor turned around and told Asher that they should go give their greetings. A man approached them, greeting both Asher and Eleanor. Asher wished the man a good evening, telling him it had been a while. Eleanor heard the man count Laurent's thoughts, how he, like most men, was immediately attracted to her. But was this the owner of the voice from earlier? Laurent continued to think about how Asher was the first prince, yet he believed that the one who should be king was the second prince, Robert. That made Eleanor suspicious that Laurent was one of the extremists. Laurent told Asher that he was really looking forward to the next ball. Asher asked if Laurent was planning to attend that one too. Laurent replied that he was, and that he was sure it would be a lovely evening. He thought that after they got a bit away, all they had to do was enjoy watching it all go down. He even thought about how perfect the plan was, and how he was looking forward to all the chaos unfolding. Eleanor gathered that this man was behind it, but not the one getting his hands dirty. Would he use a steward or some kind of underling? The man continued to think that Lord Robert must be pleased as well. He was sure that when their plan succeeded, Robert would praise them. Eleanor heard more information after that, but something at the back of her mind kept nagging her. Later, she enjoyed sitting in the garden with Asher and told him that she was looking forward to the next ball. Asher told Eleanor that he couldn't help but look forward to the balls where he could spend time with her, and he even thought about what kind of dress he should give her next. Eleanor took the opportunity to ask Asher if the second prince would also be attending the ball. She felt uncomfortable asking since this assassination plot might not be carried out under Prince Robert's will. To Eleanor, it felt like only some of the extremists were getting excited over it. Asher told her that Rob would also be participating, but he thought to himself that since Rob was currently in the castle, he would probably need to introduce Eleanor to him. He knew he needed to keep him in check since Rob liked pretty girls. Asher looked over at Eleanor, reminded again of how gorgeous she was. In that moment, Eleanor looked up to see a mysterious figure gazing out the window. Was that Prince Robert? She could hear him thinking about how jealous he was of his big brother. Prince Robert was 3 years younger than Prince Asher. In the game, he had been a very popular character, and as expected of brothers, he and Asher looked quite similar. Asher caught Eleanor glancing over and turned to see his brother. He was worried that his brother was already checking his fiancée out. Harry came over to tell Asher that he had been informed that Prince Robert had delayed his morning lesson and was likely on his way to them. And before anyone could say another word, Robert was there. He smiled, calling out to Lady Eleanor that he had been looking forward to meeting her. Asher smiled and greeted his brother. But Robert came on very strong, even wanting to hug Eleanor. Asher embraced Rob instead, while Eleanor heard him thinking that Rob had probably intended to hug her. It was clear that Rob was quite happy to have accomplished that much. Eleanor smiled, seeing the two brothers together. Asher wondered why she was smiling at Rob too and worried that she would run out of smiles for him. But really, Eleanor was happy to see how well the two brothers got along. Rob told Eleanor that he was happy he could spend time with her like this. Eleanor told him that the pleasure was all hers. Rob asked if it was all right if he called her his sister-in-law, and Eleanor told him that as long as His Highness was fine with it, then he could call her whatever he wanted. Asher smiled, telling Rob that they would be married sooner or later, so it was fine for him to refer to Eleanor as his sister. Rob smiled, as did Asher. He knew that they would have a very happy marriage. Eleanor was pleased to hear that Asher was looking forward to their marriage, and she turned to Rob to ask if he was also planning on attending the next ball. Rob smiled, telling Eleanor that he was, so together they would look forward to it. But Rob was worried that it was going to be a big deal, since there was a plan to do a clean sweep with Asher. Eleanor wondered what that meant. Was there something else being planned? She glanced at Asher, who was smiling brightly beside his sibling. Asher thought to himself that at the next ball, the plan was for him to be served poison. They needed to clean out the extremists now, or it would be too late. He could only do his best. Rob, on the other hand, wished that the extremists would stop being so reckless and support him normally. His dream was to someday create a harem and live happily ever after. Eleanor went pale hearing this. They already knew everything? She realized that these two were far more capable than she was. And on top of that, even though he knew they were planning to assassinate him, Asher didn't let it show at all. Not to mention, he hadn't even let it slip in his inner voice. Even though she could hear his thoughts, there was still so much Eleanor didn't know about Asher. Before, Prince Asher had looked sad when he thought he couldn't be relied on, but to think it could feel this painful to be powerless. Eleanor felt like she was going to cry at her own uselessness. She turned to Harry, who was again thinking nothing other than Vavavoom. He was always the same. A carriage arrived for Eleanor, marking today as the day of the ball. Asher was so happy to gift Eleanor her new dress, and he couldn't wait to see it on her. The plan was that he would be served poison at the ball, and although Prince Asher could handle it, it seemed like he didn't treasure himself at all. Eleanor began to panic before deciding that she just needed to find something she could do. Asher met Eleanor at the carriage and she rushed out, apologizing for making him wait. Asher told her it was fine and that the dress she was wearing suited her beautifully. He suggested they make their way inside, and all Asher could think about was how he was going to do his best tonight. He could only wonder what was waiting for them. They opened the door to see a crowd of people. Tonight there was the pressure that Prince Asher might be assassinated, and Eleanor was nervous that the assassin was among the throng of guests. Constantly hearing all these inner voices was making her feel sick, but if she could focus, she would be able to tell whose inner voice it was. She knew it was going to be okay. Asher and Eleanor had the first dance before greeting some of their guests. People came and went, and Eleanor heard some nasty thoughts about Prince Asher, that he was a cocky prince and that he was going to be knocked from his position tonight. Asher remained composed, although he too knew that it was about time. He excused himself from Eleanor, telling her that he was going to go and give his greetings. He promised he would only be a second. Eleanor reassured him that she understood, so he left Eleanor in Harry's care, who told him that he understood. Asher was worried about leaving her, but if something were to happen to her, he would feel awful. Eleanor heard his inner voice and wondered what that meant, and finally Siegfried arrived. He wandered in with another man by his side. It was a server carrying a few glasses. The server approached Asher and asked him if he wanted some wine. Eleanor looked up, terrified over what was happening next. What was he planning to do? Asher picked up a flute, and Eleanor gasped. Did he not realize there was poison in it? Harry looked up at Eleanor, who was thinking that maybe Prince Asher already had some kind of plan. But before she realized it, she had already started moving. Even though she wanted him to treasure himself, even though she wanted them to be together, she had to face the reality that he might die tonight. She heard a man ask her if she was all right, but all Eleanor could think about was Asher. He brought the flute to his lips and drank the wine. So Asher drank up the wine and Eleanor couldn't help but call out. He looked up, calling the drink delicious. But of course he was thinking how gross it was. Eleanor paused in confusion, watching Asher think about how he had always hated the flavor of poison. He was surprised they really tried to kill him. But he now understood why he was trained with poison. Suddenly, Rob complained that his throat was hurting and his attendant told him to hurry up and get used to it, since it could save his life. So that was the reason why Prince Asher was so careless with himself. Eleanor knew it. Those were the eyes of someone who had given up, just like she had weeks ago, when she no longer hoped to trust people, or to have somebody she could depend on. Asher saw Eleanor and smiled. It almost looked like he was sparkling. It felt like something was bursting inside Eleanor, but she couldn't put a name on this feeling yet. All of these feelings were getting muddled up, and it felt like her heart was crying out louder than ever. Asher asked her what was wrong, and Eleanor looked up. She could hear an angry voice wondering why Asher didn't die. It was Count Laurent. Laurent dashed through the crowd, stressed that he had been found out. He knew he needed to get out of there as fast as possible. So he grabbed the tray, coming up with a plan. He would get someone to drink the wine, it didn't matter who. That would create a scene dramatic enough for him to flee without anyone noticing. Eleanor couldn't believe what she was hearing. She immediately rushed to Asher to tell him she was going to fix her makeup. From there, Eleanor saw the drink being taken around the room. She knew she needed to think fast. But was there anything she could do? A few minutes ago, Eleanor had been thinking how it seemed like somehow the prince and his people had found out about it. Then all that was left was to catch the main offenders. When Lady Eleanor came to give her greetings earlier, it was the first time Siegfried saw her with Prince Asher, and she was totally different from the time she was with Siegfried. She had been on his mind this whole time, and even though a woman like that could be found anywhere, Siegfried heard his name and it was Laurent offering him a drink. Siegfried thought it would be a good idea to calm himself down, but before he could take it, Eleanor walked past him. Of course, her beauty caught his eye, and he didn't even flinch when he spilled the drink. Everyone asked if he was alright, but he was just taken aback by Eleanor's beauty. That expression, that smile, made him feel like she and he were the only ones in the room. It was beautiful enough to make you delude yourself into thinking you were special. It was different from the way she smiled with Asher. Siegfried was annoyed she left, and as Eleanor walked, everyone had their eyes on her. Harry told her the powder room was this way, but Eleanor told him she would be happy to walk alone. She was often told that she had a nice body and face, so she should use them to her advantage. She was thoroughly instructed on how to please the people around her. She absolutely hated her looks and all the attention they brought, but they came in handy. Now she didn't understand her own emotions. She felt like she wanted to lose her temper, but she also felt like she wanted to laugh and mock her own uselessness. All of these feelings were jumbled together, and she couldn't seem to settle her emotions. Eleanor didn't want to get hurt, so she always worked to not feel anything. This was the first time she had felt this emotion, and she didn't understand it. Eleanor looked into the mirror, and she was so relieved for once. She began to cry. Her precious person, Prince Asher, was alive. Eleanor made her way back into the ball and heard people wondering what Count Laurent had done. There were others being escorted out too. Siegfried looked at Eleanor and told her she looked stunning today. He asked if it was all right for him to accompany her for a dance. Eleanor heard Siegfried's thoughts, how he was flustered and self-conscious. Eleanor didn't even need to hear his inner voice to see that his hand was shaking. Could it be that he drank some of the poison? Siegfried was acting strange, with his eyes hazy and unfocused. His face was very red, too. When she felt his hand touch hers, it was hot. Eleanor began to panic, unsure of what to do. She looked up at Siegfried and asked him if he was okay. She asked whether he felt feverish. But Siegfried could only call for his hand, and then she saw Harry. She began to panic, but Siegfried had other things on his mind. Suddenly, Eleanor was saved once again by Asher. He took hold of her, catching her swiftly in his arms, asking her if it was about time she headed back. Eleanor heard Asher's inner voice, and he was livid that Siegfried had put his hands on his fiancée. She could hear the sound of his heart thudding in his chest. Did he rush over here to rescue her? Eleanor looked up with a big smile, realizing Asher came for her. Siegfried turned to Asher to request a dance with Lady Eleanor. Asher smiled, telling him that it seemed like Eleanor was worn out, but maybe next time. Eleanor felt super awkward. She turned to Asher to tell him she was a bit overwhelmed by all the people. She asked if they could take a walk in the garden, so that was that. They excused themselves from Siegfried, and Eleanor was relieved to have gotten out of that one. Siegfried, on the other hand, looked completely defeated. Eleanor and Asher made their way into the garden, where Asher turned to look into her eyes. He brushed his hand across her face, but all he could think about was whether she smiled at Siegfried. He told Eleanor that she shouldn't go around showing everyone that smile too much, as it could attract someone strange. Eleanor could only accept his request, and she asked Asher if he was feeling alright. Asher asked why she was asking, and she nearly blurted out that it was because he drank the poison, but of course she managed to stop herself just in time. Eleanor knew that there was no way anyone would know about the assassination plot, so she needed to come up with an excuse. She blurted out that she noticed the prince was always working so hard for other people, and that was why she was worried about his well-being. But she gulped. She didn't want to come across as insincere. Asher smiled, thanking her for her concern. He knew she was kind and paid attention to the small details. He looked into her eyes. But nearby, two voices were arguing. A girl said to Laurent that she didn't want him to get in the way. It was finally time for the start of the heroine's story. She declared that she had a tough time so far, but it was almost time to meet the villainess, Eleanor. The following morning, Eleanor was greeted with a good morning by her attendant, who also asked if she had slept well. Eleanor told her she did, and her attendant was glad after the hectic night that had occurred. She told her that if she needed anything, she should let them know right away. After the assassination attempt, the extremists had quieted down, and the punishment was still undecided. Eleanor was asked if her princess lessons had begun in full swing and how she was finding them. Eleanor spoke to her attendant about her life so far in the palace. Of course, it was sad for her to be away from her family home, but when she made mistakes back there, they wouldn't just blow over, so maybe it was good that she was finally leaving the house. Eleanor told her attendant that life in the palace was very enjoyable, and she was glad she could live there now. Her attendant smiled, telling Eleanor she was sure today would also be a good day. They would put some energy into it and help her get ready. Eleanor smiled. She looked lovely by the end of it, with a cute dress and a braided hairstyle. The attendant smiled, finding Eleanor super cute and even thinking she might be the best lady in the world. Today, Eleanor had a date in town with Prince Asher. She smiled as she saw him. Asher thought she was so cute it had to be against the rules. He told her he was looking forward to spending the day with her, suggesting they make a move. It was then that Eleanor noticed Asher's hair was down. She asked him where Lord Harry was. Asher explained that Harry was working hard on something in the palace today. Eleanor wondered what Harry could be up to. She was happy, however, as this meant she and Asher could enjoy their date. The two set off for the town. There, Eleanor enjoyed the bustling streets and stalls, seeing the delicious food and lively crowd. It was an eye-opening experience. Asher told her that he also enjoyed coming here, thinking that all the people were a testament to how peaceful it was. He was so happy. It was a different kind of liveliness from the balls. Everyone here was so full of energy. He took Eleanor's hand, telling her that there were guards keeping watch, but that it would be best not to lose sight of each other. Asher knew he needed to protect Eleanor, who smiled in approval. She was so cute. It was then that the couple spotted a mother scolding her son for running off. She brought him into a hug, which made Eleanor pause. Recently, there had been cases of kidnappings in various countries, so the lady thought to herself that she needed to be careful. Asher called for Eleanor, telling her that there was a store nearby. He asked if she wanted to check it out. Eleanor told him she would. She had heard from a maid before that lovers in town would wear things to match, and she would love for her and Asher to try it. She wanted a visible sign that they were together, but maybe that made her greedy. Before, just being by his side alone was enough to make Eleanor extremely happy. But it was then that she heard a strange thought. Something about the prince and the villainess being spotted. Eleanor looked around to see who the voice belonged to. Asher asked if she was okay. Then Eleanor spotted a lady's signal and told Asher to watch out. A woman appeared who looked quite familiar, with pigtails and big round eyes. Could it be that she was the heroine? The woman squealed, and Asher and Eleanor were instructed by the guards to stand back. Eleanor hid behind Asher's shoulder, wondering what was going on. Asher instructed Eleanor not to move away from him, and she did as she was told. It was said that the girl was injured, and Eleanor called to her, asking if she was okay. Suddenly, a hooded figure appeared from behind Eleanor, his inner voice saying goodbye to her. He told her that for now, she should have fun with those men. Eleanor cried out in pain, not recalling any scenario like the one she was in. Her knowledge of the game was vague to begin with, and over the months and years after being reborn into this world, her memory had faded. She was frozen, and Asher shouted after her, but everything went dark. Eleanor woke up on the ground. She heard voices saying something about how she was a slave. Eleanor darted up to find herself in some kind of cell. Where was she? She turned to see some children with fluffy ears. Beastmen children, who she vaguely remembered from the game. They were servants of Eleanor's. But right now, she didn't know if they were her allies. She tried to open the door, but it was locked. The children wondered if she was planning to escape, thinking to themselves that it was no use and there was no way it would open. Eleanor heard voices saying that it was the lady's orders, but asking if it would really be alright. What she ordered was cruel, telling them to unlock the beastman's door. They continued, saying that they were a bloodthirsty lot, so she would be killed in no time, but to give such a beauty as a toy to the beastman was a waste. Eleanor feared she was going to be killed. She saw the sharp teeth of the children, but their thoughts reassured her. One of the boys called the men idiots. They were not savages, nor were they animals. Eleanor spotted collars around the children's necks. She remembered the woman's thoughts about the recent cases of kidnappings in various countries. Were these children kidnapped? Eleanor asked the children if they were okay, seeing that they were injured. But they snapped at her and told her not to mess with them. They reassured her that they couldn't help her. Eleanor knew these kids had lost hope. At least that was what their eyes were saying. So she took hold of the child's hand and told him they should get out of there together. Eleanor looked into the children's eyes and told them she was not the same as she was back then. Eleanor suggested that they should work together to get out of the cell, but the child yelled at her, telling her he would never trust a human. Eleanor heard his thoughts, that she was pretty but they couldn't trust her. She would definitely betray them. So Eleanor suggested that the kids could use her. Once they got out, they could forget about her and run away. The eldest looked unsure about what to do, so Eleanor told him that if he and the others wanted to get out of there, then she could be useful to them. The kids discussed if it was a good idea. Of course, they didn't want to be in the cell anymore. Eleanor thought that for now she should just do what she could. Right now the men were here, and the path they took went like this, so she could predict that the way to escape was in a certain direction. By then, the children had decided to team up with her to escape. Eleanor smiled, telling them she understood. She explained how she would begin by luring the guard into the room, and she needed the children to knock him out. She asked them if they could manage that. The eldest boy told Eleanor that her plan sounded simple. Right now, the only thing binding them were their collars. He thought that these collars shouldn't hurt if that woman wasn't here. Eleanor then realized the purpose of the collars, but she wondered who they were referring to. Eleanor told them that she would explain the plan. The kids listened closely to what Eleanor had to say. She explained that it was her only method, and the kids asked how she managed to investigate and figure out the exits and create a map. Eleanor smiled sheepishly, telling them it was her magic power. The kids weren't buying it, though. They changed the subject, asking what her name was. Eleanor introduced herself, as did the children. The eldest was Riku, and the younger ones were called Kai and Ku. Eleanor smiled, knowing they were a team for now. They vowed to carry out the plan that night, and they were most certainly going to make it out of there. Meanwhile, the guard complained that he was tired, but realized he was the only one on duty. As expected, all he could think about was Eleanor, and whether she had already been devoured by the beastman. What a waste, he sighed to himself. So Eleanor called out, asking for a big, strong man. The guard perked up, wondering if it was the girl he was thinking about. The guard called back, asking her what had become of the beastman children. Eleanor told him to come and take a look. The guard began to stutter as Eleanor seduced him, telling him to open the door and they could have some fun together. The guard paused, thinking about how sexy Eleanor was, but he remembered that he was the only guard on duty. He thought to himself that he could take a peek. Eleanor got the kids to kiss her hands, and the guard's eyes widened. Eleanor asked him to come, and the guard lost all sense of logic in his mind. He told Eleanor that the beastman kids weren't enough to satisfy her and decided that he would come. But by that point, Riku karate chopped the guard's neck, taking him out with one hit. Eleanor smiled that the plan had gone accordingly, but all the boy could think about was how scary women were. Eleanor quickly covered her chest and Riku passed her the keys. He told her the guy had them, and since he was already tied up, they should move fast. Eleanor thanked him and together they headed out. They moved carefully, but a man was behind the wall that concealed them. It was then that Eleanor heard his inner voice saying he hated them and would destroy this country. The man's memories flooded her mind through his inner voice. Eleanor held onto her head in fear, and before she knew it, she crouched on the ground. Why was he here? The man was Noah, the dragon prince of a ruined country. The prince was a love interest that the villainous Eleanor secretly kept underground. The dragon prince and the beastman children, Eleanor thought there was no way she would run into them in a place like this. She could sense that his inner voice was so full of grief it completely took over her senses. She apologized to the kids for her brief mini heart attack, telling them they should run. There was another person Eleanor needed to save, but to her surprise, the children told her they would help. They didn't want to leave her behind, and going together was better than going alone. She thanked the kids and they made their way back to the cell. It was there that she saw him, the dragon prince. He darkly demanded who Eleanor and the kids were. So filled with hatred, it was hard for Eleanor to hear his inner voice. Eleanor told him they were breaking out of this place and asked if he wanted to go with them. The prince told her that she was delusional. No woman with a bunch of kids was getting out of here. He continued to say that the only thing waiting for those who fled with one of these collars was death, and if they ran away and didn't get it off in 3 days, it would shock them. Eleanor knew that if it was a device like that, using the Duke's power would make it possible to remove them. Afterwards, it was just about the person's desire to flee. She told the man they would find a way, but the prince continued to be apprehensive. Eleanor snapped that if he didn't take action, then nothing would change, so they needed to go together. Eventually, the prince followed her. Eleanor knew that if they failed and got caught, it would just mean she would be tortured again. She remembered Asher's gentle inner voice, and she knew she needed to be with him again. That was her motivation to get out of this mess. So all 5 rushed out of the dungeon, eventually making it into the woods. The children couldn't believe it, they really made it out. But Eleanor could still see that there was a lot of fog, and the prince was demanding to know what they were to do now. He snapped that Eleanor didn't have a plan after all, but Eleanor reassured him. Even if it was quite far away, she was sure that she would find it. She closed her eyes and tried her best to hear his voice. And then suddenly it came to her. Her eyes filled with tears as she saw a crowd with horses. He really came. Eleanor told the kids to quickly go with her, but she was getting tired. She heard that the guards had swords, and if she were caught again, it really would be over. Even though there was only a bit left to go, the prince kept looking back, telling Eleanor they were going to catch her. He then announced that he was going to carry her, so that was what he did. The prince ran as fast as he could, knowing he couldn't outrun a horse though. All Eleanor could do was hold on. Eleanor was terrified that she was going to be left behind. She heard the guards targeting her and was convinced that she was going to be killed. But then suddenly she was swept off her feet by the prince and couldn't believe that he was protecting her. He only let her go to change the way she was facing. It was then that she heard her name being called by Asher. The person she wanted to see the most was right in front of her. Eleanor began to cry. The prince recognized Asher immediately, telling Eleanor to get down. But then he suddenly noticed that she had stopped shaking. Eleanor rushed over to Asher, who held her tightly in his arms. He was so glad that she was all right, and Eleanor was too. She thanked him for coming, knowing that he wasn't somebody who should come to a dangerous place like this. Asher turned to Harry with Eleanor in his arms. He told him that he would be leaving the rest to him. Harry told everyone to start moving, and Eleanor was even relieved to hear Lord Harry's inner voice. She turned to Prince Asher, telling him to protect the man with wounds and the beastmen children. Asher did as he was told, saying he would hear about what happened later, so for now she needed to take it easy. But Eleanor heard Asher getting jealous again, having just seen her being carried by another man. He told his people to make sure that the others were kept safe anyway. The mysterious man and Asher made eye contact, making matters even more awkward. Eleanor tried to relax, and in no time she was back in the safety of the palace. She was greeted by her maids, who told her that she had slept for almost a whole day. Eleanor smiled, seeing her maids appear super happy. They told her that her parents were here too. Eleanor's mother came rushing in to check on her daughter, followed by her father. They fussed over her, telling her they were so worried. But Eleanor knew how ingenuine their affection was. Deep down, they were only panicking that the engagement would be called off because of this, and the only good thing about Eleanor was her looks. Eleanor forced a smile, but she knew her parents hadn't changed. Eleanor's mother turned to see the beastmen children. Eleanor explained how they were locked up with her too. Her mother looked them up and down, and the kids could smell that she was bad news. Her father chuckled awkwardly, suggesting it was time for them to head home. They were truly glad Eleanor was okay, but told her to have a proper discussion with the prince, but of course her father was praying his idiot daughter wouldn't mess this engagement up. Her mother also agreed, thinking this was the only reason they had her. Eleanor remembered how her parents were like this her entire life, and it hurt just as much now as it did back then. She obediently smiled at her parents, telling them she would, but she was fed up with this part of herself. After 16 years in this world, Eleanor thought she should know how her parents were, and yet there was some small part of her that had hoped they would be worried. She closed the door behind her parents and felt really drained by her encounter with them. She was engaged to Prince Asher and was able to come to the palace, so she had finally come to her senses. She asked the kids if they were all right. The kids told Eleanor it was nice that her mom and dad came to visit, but they were thinking how different they were from their own parents. Eleanor told the kids she was going to go and talk to Asher, so she asked if the 3 of them could wait for her in the room. She waved them off, finding them adorable. Asher waited for Eleanor at his desk, and Eleanor smiled, telling him she just wanted to see him. She thanked him for saving her, but to her surprise, he pulled her in for a massive hug. Asher apologized for letting her go through such a scary experience. He thought to himself that even though they had a date together, he still felt guilty for how the day turned out. Eleanor told Asher it was okay. She had faith that he would come and save her. Asher pulled her in again, this time closer. He thought to himself that all of this mess happened after that weird girl showed up, and so Eleanor got wrapped up in it. He knew he couldn't forgive that. Eleanor turned to Asher to ask what happened, and he told her the whole story. The woman who had protected Prince Asher when he was attacked seemed suspicious, so she was being investigated. Eleanor thought that if she was the leader, then why would she injure herself? She felt like her vibe was a bit different from the heroine in the game. Speaking of which, the bandits called the person in charge the lady, and the Beastmen children also referred to her as that woman. Asher was just as confused about who the woman was. It seemed like there was some kind of organization involved after all. He needed to investigate in more detail. Eleanor then took the opportunity to ask what happened to the man who was with them, and Asher thought there was no point in hiding things. He explained that when they tried to help him, he became aggressive, so he was put in the dungeon. Eleanor asked if that was true. Asher began to panic, reassuring her the dungeon was clean and he would be well taken care of. In fact, he was safe there, but he was clearly hostile, so they didn't have much choice. Asher knew this guy was no ordinary person, and if possible, he wouldn't want Eleanor involved with him. Of course, Eleanor understood where Asher was coming from, but this man was a victim too, so she told Asher that she owed this man a great debt. She asked if anything could be done for him. Asher thought that he didn't intend to keep him like this forever, and since he was her savior on top of that, he told Eleanor okay, and that he also felt bad about locking up the man who saved her. Of course, he thought it would be reasonable to have a noble take him in on probation. Eleanor suggested that they leave his care to them, but Asher's inner voice cried out. He knew Eleanor was so kind she would certainly check on the man, but he told her it was fine. He would make sure to find somebody who would take him in. Eleanor thought that maybe she hadn't thought things through properly. She asked about Asher's aunt, the Duke's wife, Madame Michelina. Her late husband, Lord Shine, was a descendant of the royal family, and Eleanor had heard that she was living out the rest of her years quietly at their capital mansion. Because of her distinguished work for the royal family and the beautiful way she carried herself, she was titled Madame Michelina as a sign of respect. And she was from Azebia, which had friendly relations with the Dragon Country. If it was her, Eleanor was sure that she would be able to understand Noah. Eleanor looked at Asher, who looked frozen. She panicked, thinking she had said too much and worried he would be suspicious about how she knew this much. But Asher wondered whether Eleanor realized that Noah was from the Dragon Country. That surprised him, but he put it down simply to her being attentive. He thanked her and told her it was a good idea and that he would let her know when things were decided. Eleanor smiled, reminded once again of Asher's warm, kind heart. He petted her head gently, and Eleanor wanted him to touch her even more. Would that be greedy of her? Eleanor told Asher she had a favor to ask. She wanted to give her thanks to the man. Asher smiled, noticing her kind eyes. He told her okay, but requested to accompany her. Eleanor's eyes lit up as she thanked Asher. Asher was really glad to see her smiling, and that was all he was thinking. The truth was, his inner voice really did put Eleanor at ease. Noah heard a voice ask him to go with them for a moment. The voice belonged to Lady Michelina, who told him that Prince Asher and Lady Eleanor had come to see him. Noah thought that it had been about a week since he came here. At that time, he was moved from the prison to the estate of Lady Michelina. She told him that in her mansion he may spend his time however he wanted. So thanks to Prince Asher, he was now allowed to have this much freedom. The truth was, Noah did act like an idiot during the rescue. He told the guards he would destroy this country, thinking of the ones who destroyed his own country and stole his friends and his people. The enemy, the girl with pigtails, was the one from Ceylon. The Ceylon kingdom and the people of that kingdom were really hated by Noah. He remembered Asher calling for him to calm down and talk, and Noah thought to himself if this man was really the one that he should hate. In her mansion, Lady Michelina sat Noah down to tell him that the Ceylon kingdom was innocent. So that left Noah clueless. He had no idea who he was supposed to resent at that point. When Eleanor and Asher came, Noah stood up. Now that they were all in a seemingly normal environment, Noah realized how dignified Eleanor appeared. She told him that she was truly grateful for his help. Noah told Eleanor that he wanted to thank her too, for taking the collar off his neck. Eleanor asked him if he was still hurting anywhere, and Noah told her he was fine. Eleanor smiled, happy to hear it. Noah was shocked. It had been a while since he last met somebody who would earnestly worry about him, and he found himself unable to take his eyes off of those eyes that were looking into his. He told Eleanor he appreciated her consistent consideration of him, and Asher told him that they would help him with what they could. But first, he needed to take care of himself. They both smiled, and Noah agreed. He thought that they both suited each other very well. 1 month ago, the girl in pigtails, Chelsea, was complaining that she was tired. Her father told her she needed to endure it for a bit more, and Chelsea smiled. She thought the world was centered around her, so it was obvious it would all go well, but it was awful making the world go right. She thought that if the Dragon Country did not collapse, then Noah would not appear as a love interest. And even though it did finally fall, Chelsea didn't feel like it was going to collapse, so she had to blame it on the Ceylon kingdom. Noah wouldn't listen to what he was told, and even capturing the Beastmen children was awful. She continued to say that the villainess, Eleanor, also wasn't doing her job. This was a plundering game, so she had to meet and gather all the love interests. She was told that they should capture the villainess and have her meet them all in one go. If Chelsea did that, it would go accordingly. Chelsea's eyes lit up, approving of the idea. She called for them to hurry up and work out the plan. Back to the current day, in the palace treatment room, Chelsea shrieked that she had finally met Asher. She had protected him and got hurt, so she managed to get into the palace to be treated. But this world's villainess was slacking way too much on her job. She sat up, thinking that there should be something making the game still go through. Chelsea made her way out, and a maid asked her where she was going. Chelsea snapped that it was up to her and the maid shouldn't ask her anything. Her father was content to make a profit from selling the dragons, but Chelsea was just getting started. Everyone was finally going to fall into her hands, and she fantasized about a date with Prince Asher himself. Since it was a harem game, Chelsea thought they should enjoy themselves while raising the other characters' favorability. She remembered all of the story, so this should be easy for her. She decided that she would save Asher from the villainess's evil clutches, holding her hand up in determination. Meanwhile, Eleanor called for Prince Asher. She heard that he wanted to speak to her about a matter and came to see what was wrong. But when she entered the room, Asher announced that there was something he would like to give her. Eleanor could tell by his voice that he was nervous. Asher handed her a perfectly wrapped rectangular box and asked her to open it. He explained that he wanted to give it to her when they went out, but of course the incident happened. Eleanor opened the box, revealing a beautiful diamond necklace. Asher told her he would put it on, and it looked so beautiful on Eleanor's skin. Asher told her it really suited her. He was pleased as it looked just like he thought it would. Eleanor looked at Asher and thanked him. She told him she was really happy. Asher smiled, thinking that he was glad that she was happy. He took hold of her hand before telling her this was the best time to see the roses in the garden. He suggested they go on a walk together. Eleanor smiled, telling him that the palace's roses were truly wonderful. Asher grinned and told her that they had recently gotten a new variety of roses, so he would show those to her. But then Asher thought that he was thinking of naming them Eleanor. But he wondered if she would have thought that was a creepy thing to do. He wondered if it would make her pull away. Of course, they had spent this time together, so Eleanor knew that Prince Asher tried to share memories with her, and he thought about her a lot. She knew that the time she spent with Prince Asher was very pleasant. So was it okay for her to be this happy? She felt herself getting freer, and it was getting harder to let go. Asher asked Eleanor if they should make their way, and Eleanor told him yes. So they wandered into the palace gardens side by side, but Eleanor could hear an influx of thoughts. The person was getting closer and closer, and suddenly Chelsea appeared with a huge smile plastered across her face. Her eyes darted straight to Prince Asher, and Eleanor couldn't believe who it was. Lady Chelsea? All Asher could think of was why she was here. What was she planning on doing? Chelsea cooed to Asher, asking him if Eleanor was his friend. Eleanor was stunned that Chelsea referred to her as such. She could hear Chelsea thinking it had been a pain up until now, but she would be taking care of all of Chelsea's men. Eleanor thought that was just her luck. But the heroine had also reincarnated, and it seemed like she remembered more of the game than she did, the plundering game. Eleanor imagined Chelsea by Asher's side instead of her, and her mind went dark. Before she could think, she grabbed hold of Asher's arm and introduced herself as his fiancée. Eleanor looked like she wanted to tear her hair out after hearing the news. But of course, Asher was overjoyed by Eleanor's sudden affection. He didn't even know what to do about how happy he was. But Chelsea was livid. She thought about how Eleanor needed to stop leeching onto Prince Asher, as he would hate that. She decided that she was going after the perfect prince character, Prince Asher. Chelsea asked if she could join Asher on a walk as well, but she was plotting to chase out Eleanor so that they could be alone. Asher looked at Eleanor before bluntly telling Chelsea that he wanted to spend his time with his fiancée, whom he treasured more than anything. Eleanor could hear his thoughts, how he thought of Chelsea as nothing more than a headache, and how he wished she wouldn't just show up and interrupt his time with Eleanor. Eleanor desperately asked him to reconsider. She told him she didn't have any female friends, so she would like to get along. But deep down, Chelsea had a malicious plan to get closer to Asher and make him think of her as his number one. Asher sighed. He didn't want to be rude to Chelsea, but he knew what she was playing at. He knew he needed to get along with her for now and investigate. It felt like she was hiding something. Eleanor wondered what this would mean. She couldn't stop her mind from racing to think about the worst. It even felt like she was starting to pout, just like a little kid, but she couldn't help it. She watched Chelsea stare at Asher, and she knew she needed to say something. But Chelsea asked for them to get along. Fortunately, Harry came just in time. He told Chelsea that he heard from the doctor that they would like to check how her wound was healing. He offered to guide her there. Chelsea bit her lip and took it as her leave. She told everyone how unfortunate this was, but she would see them another time. Eleanor noticed that when Harry first approached Chelsea, he called her Cliff. By that, was he referring to Lady Chelsea? Asher asked Eleanor if she was ready to leave, and Eleanor said yes. Eleanor could hear Asher's thoughts. how he needed to talk to her about Lady Chelsea and explain about not getting too close. So he turned to Eleanor, who was sure that from this point on, she would get even more involved. That was the one thing she was absolutely against. She debated if it was worth discussing. She could reveal that she could hear people's inner voices. There was the possibility it could help guard against something. But if Asher knew Eleanor had heard his inner voice, he could reject her. She could only wonder what he would think. Meanwhile, Chelsea slammed her door shut. She was pissed because she was convinced she was the heroine. And seeing Eleanor with Asher today was straight up wrong. She would never forgive Eleanor for stealing her man. Of course, there were still other characters. Even if she didn't fixate on Prince Asher, it would be fine. But Chelsea didn't like that the villainess was being happy, and she wished there was something she could do. After all, she was the heroine. It was her right to obtain everything. She decided that she would just have to punish her. If she did that, it would go well. Chelsea smiled wickedly, happily imagining Eleanor's downfall.